Welcome to Writer's Life, an ongoing conversation with writers, authors, and folks in the publishing industry. I'm your host, Marvel Harrison, Publishing Director, Mimbres Press of Western New Mexico University. It is a pleasure to share a conversation today with Susan Gardner, who is founder and co-owner of the delightful, insightful Red Mountain Press. She is currently writing a book that I hope she will tell us about. Welcome to Writer's Life, Susan.
Hello, Marvel. Thank you so much for inviting me today.
Can you tell us, please, about how you got started writing in the publishing industry, setting up a press?
Well, the press is a longer story, but the press is an accident. Many years ago, I had a friend and we thought we were middle-aged then. Now I'm older than middle-aged probably, but she was a very well-known person. And we felt that women of substantial accomplishment found it very difficult to receive the recognition that the quality of their work would imply. Guys who were much less accomplished than my friend Barbara Erdman found it much easier. And it also turned out by accident, this was in Santa Fe, that in our youth in New York, we had known some of the same guys. And I say guys advisedly, because that's the politest word I know. And we used to laugh about them. I don't know if it's great, but it's better than being angry. So we had this common bond. And we were thinking that Barbara and I, and then my husband, Devin Ross, would join us. And we would try to find a way to help accomplished mid-career women to receive the due that they should have by possibly doing a catalog or the equivalent for writers of a new and selected type of book. And to my immense sorrow, my friend Barbara died. And without much thinking about it, I decided to go on anyway, partly to recognize her and partly because it just seemed like a good idea. And that's what's happened. And so I didn't know anything about publishing. I didn't even know it was a business. I mean, I knew the big guys were a business, the famous six, Hachette and Simon and Schuster. But I had no concept that a small press could even be a business. And so I just went ahead and did whatever I thought was best for that particular author. And it sort of has turned out. When we started, we got 7 submissions from men for every one from a woman. Now, the last 4 or 5 years especially, after almost 2 decades of effort, we get 4 submissions from women for every 3 from men. And I have written, I hope that your readers, you don't mind if I make a little pitch for this idea. Women are rewarded in school and other places for being good, for following the rules, for being quiet. And you have to be prepared that until you've gotten 300 rejections, you're not rejected yet. The competition for the few spaces that are available in small presses, the competition is horrendous. Red Mountain was getting, the last few years, about 600 submissions, and we could publish 10 books. And 10 books is a lot for a small press. So I would say to everyone, don't give up. Keep on with your work. I'm sorry if you think that I'm on this little soapbox here. Keep all your rejections. Now that they come in email, print them out. Paper your bathroom with them. Do something useful. And when they're funny, you can throw them away.
Okay. Well, I think that's really sage advice. And of course, that would come from someone who has decades of experience in
And
this industry.
tons of what are politely called declines, but really makes you feel like they're rejections.
Okay.
And I've got my share, and I got this advice about keeping them until they're funny. I got that advice from a much older poet many years ago. And I felt so bad the first time I submitted something, and I thought it was, and I, to this day, I think it's one of my best poems ever, even though it's only 19 words. I got a rejection letter that told me I had a lot of talent and showed promise, but I should try to be more concise.
Okay, I find that funny.
It is funny. It is funny.
Oh, let's nail that. Like, couldn't you curb it down to 13 and a half words?
Right. So I have an author now in Seattle who her birthday, to be 80 years old, was the day I accepted her first book. And at various times, she became a little hesitant. She's a brilliant person. She was a scientist, but she's also a poet. And I didn't realize this, but in the course of trying to sustain her, because I thought she had a really good book, which she does. It was a book of about 2 years ago. And I was in her house last summer, and in her studio, she has a big sign that says, "If you do it, believe in it." And I said, "That's a great sign. I'm going to copy that." And she said, "No, don't you know where that came from? You told me that."
The-
So I have these wonderful connections with our poets and our authors. They're not all poets. And we were thinking maybe it was time, given our age, to maybe think about passing the press on and going on to other things, or maybe reducing this work in our lives, because it's pretty heavy lifting. And instead, the press is going to grow into a whole new category of work. And we're going to, there's this idea. I wrote a poem called Each One, and it was the idea that each one can do one thing. And it's a very old idea. What can you do? When can you do it? Now? Who can do it? You can do it, or I can do it. Well, if not me, then who? So we are going to now expand into both poetry and creative nonfiction that addresses climate change and the environment and democracy, and if at all possible, where those three things intersect. And I don't care what form it comes in, as long as it's really good writing and beautiful language, because we can write about hard things in beautiful language. And so at my rather advanced time of life, I'm expanding to a whole new category of things.
Well, congratulations on that, but particularly thank you and Devin for that, and for willing to see that intersection. It's difficult for me to think about writing about any one of those three categories without it touching the others. It's like a Venn diagram. They all
Exactly.
intersect.
Okay.
And so, yes. So, well, I'd really like you to share with our listeners a little bit about what you're writing right now.
Well, actually, I have a new book that fits this category, to my surprise. And it's called Love and the Weather. And that's what it's about. I called it that because that was the topics. And then my early readers, dear friends who are poets, all said, no, keep it. That's what it is. We don't have to go anywhere else. And it's a lot of things that touch me in these areas. Love takes a lot of forms. And it's not only romantic love, but there's a lot of other things, including in my case, even though I just recently moved from New Mexico to Bainbridge Island in Puget Sound, Washington, quite a lot of the poems are about my love of New Mexico, which is very deep, and I miss it a lot. Seeing your background makes me feel homesick. But we also have a lot of different forms of things that happen to us. And I discovered in writing the new work that without actually setting out with an agenda, because I don't write with an agenda, I discovered that most of the poems that are about quote unquote nature actually in their deeper sense are exactly about the environment and the changes we're experiencing in our lives. I have one poem that I wrote a long time ago that was never published. And it started out with that there were 285,000 some odd acres, the exact number of acres that were burning in the Wallow fire in New Mexico some years ago. And then I started to update it, and I still didn't publish it. Then I have 5 years, and we've gotten from 285,000 acres in New Mexico to hundreds of thousands of acres, to 1 million acres. And in June of this year, which was my last entry on this poem, which is in the new book, I had to stop somewhere. There's almost 3 million acres on that particular day, June, whatever it was, June 19th. There were almost 3 million acres burning only in California. These are NOAA's figures, not mine. And the poem ends about how the microbits of these fires, this is not an exact, I don't memorize my poems, but they come over into our town, down over our mountains, into our town, into our lungs, with us now and forever, until we're also microbits, and then they'll still be in this world. And as it turned out, people seem to relate to this idea of thinking about a real thing. Poetry doesn't have to be elaborate to turn our attention. To do our job as poets is to notice things, or I think my job as a poet is to notice things, to point toward them. And I don't have an MFA. I studied other things in school. But I've been reading since I was 3 years old when I got my first library card. And I still always have several books going at one time. And I think that's really the way the best poets that I know, even when they have all the proper degrees, their real education is also reading and connecting your mind to the mind of the author, and also letting ourselves look without preconceptions as much as we're able. And so in my work as a visual artist, which I was a visual artist for 40 years before I ever published anything, and especially in my work as a poet, that's what I try to do, is to just look as plainly as possible. And it seems like some people read it for what it is, which I'm very happy about.
Well, you're able to bring something to the world through that very clear and keen observation. It actually, as you were speaking, reminded me of things that Georgia O'Keeffe used to say about her paintings. She'd take the inside of a blossom and
Mhm.
blow it up feet and feet big, and she would show them in New York and say, well, at least maybe even busy New Yorkers would notice the blossoms then. And I think you're bringing light to the fires. We know about them, but I think the more that we almost have a baseline tolerance that's elevated for, oh, it's another fire. We miss the very depth of that destruction of how you take it in your poetry.
Some years ago, I can't remember which year because every year is horrible in terms of fires. But there was one year where Arizona and New Mexico together, because we don't have drought, the rain years are the exception. Every other year, the dry years are the normal.
Mhm.
And you could see our fires from space. They took pictures from the satellites. At one point on a single day, there were over 10 million trees burning down just in Arizona and New Mexico. And that's no longer strange. So we thought maybe what the press could do is give a voice to people who are thinking about these things also.
Good.
And I keep on doing it too.
I owned a small press in New Mexico in the 90s, and actually, pre-digital, and
Mm,
actually lost 47,000 books of inventory in the Via Caldera fire,
mm,
when everything burned up in the Jemez.
right.
And, I mean, fire became obviously very real in in my life, in our family's life. And so I really thank you, applaud you for recognizing that piece and putting it into one context of the environment. I mean, that's just one, not minor, but there are many other major also environmental insults.
I'm waiting to see what people send me.
Yes. Well, I appreciate that very much. So,
During this move, we published a few books last spring, and then during the move, we obviously couldn't do everything at one time, but we'll open submissions again. And we're going to also try something new, hoping that only serious people will take us up on it. We decided not to have any submission fees.
okay.
It's out of control. People have to submit to 20 or 30 or 50 different presses. I'm not exaggerating. And the expense shuts people out. So we thought there's only a handful of presses altogether that are not asking for submission fees. But we hope that people will be serious when they send it. I don't know, I might get too many.
Well, you'll weed through them, you'll sort through them, and they'll speak to you as need be. So,
The submissions are like an education in a way. Because if you read 1,000 manuscripts a year, as I've been doing in recent years, you see pretty much what people are thinking about. And something funny or odd, I guess it's not hilarious. You can see different things from people in different parts of the country. I can almost tell without looking. People from New England write about their town and their home and their street and things that are very close. People in the mountain regions write much more expansively about the landscape because, after all, in proportion to the Rocky Mountains, we get an idea of how we fit and that we're not too, I wouldn't say this is true of everybody, but it does help you to keep things in proportion when you look at 12,000 feet in front of you. But the thing that surprised me the most when I realized it was that people from California, many of them from Los Angeles or coastal cities of other coastal cities, almost never mention the Pacific Ocean, which is the dominant environmental and the dominant visual thing in their lives. And they write about personal things. A lot of their manuscripts are in the first person. and they're writing about difficulties that they've had. Other people do too, but not to the same degree and not in the same way. And I just found that to be really interesting. Maybe it's the effect of the movie business. I don't know. I can't really explain it, but it's very noticeable.
Well, I also think that there are actually very few people who get to see the ocean on a regular basis that live in California.
You're
It's,
probably right. You're in California.
I mean, it's just as interesting in the mountains. You can see mountains from a distance. In the Northwest, pardon me, Northeast, you feel your town because that's what's right there.
Mm.
And I think you've hit on something very interesting, but it makes me realize we need to invite, encourage, and celebrate the out of doors more than we ever have before. Because the more that we can nurture that in people, the more they'll be able to care about it.
Yeah, a lot of poets are very interested in their internal life rather than their relationship to other people or their relationship to the place they live. And I don't know if this is the effect of the way MFA programs are taught or the emphasis that they bring, but it's just the larger idea of the landscape is quite minimal. It's not nearly what we would think of as it being true in poets of past generations. Maybe that makes me look as old as I really am. But you can't think of Auden or Wordsworth or anybody in between without thinking of where they lived, without knowing. Think of Dorothy Wordsworth, never mind William. Dorothy Wordsworth is not much written about and not much read, but she's a stupendously interesting poet. And when she worked with her brother, a lot of her work wound up in his poems. People don't really, I have a copy of her, the notebook where she made drawings and wrote about what she was seeing in front of her. But she was also William's main editor, along with Coleridge. The three of them lived in one house for years. And when you read Dorothy Wordsworth, you know exactly where she is and what she was doing, and you can see what she saw. And it was all very interesting. Emily Dickinson lets us know exactly what she's looking at. And not much of it is in her bedroom. And she rarely writes about her own griefs. She more relates to what we have in front of us, how to use our eyes and our minds for what's right in front of us. Her little sketches are really gems, many of them. They're individual tiny works of art, like miniaturists, like Islamic miniaturists. That's what it most reminds me of. But you don't see that much in current ways of thinking about writing poetry, or writing anything else for that matter.
Well, in winding our interview down, can you share with me if you could have a manuscript come your way that you would just jump up and down over? What might that look and feel like?
Well, I have had a few like that. I have a poet friend. He became a friend after he was an author at the press. He wasn't somebody I knew before. Paul Nemser wrote a book called 1,000 Curves that I loved. George Looney's work. George Looney teaches in Pennsylvania, and he is, I think, one of the, if you had to name the 100 or 50 even most important poets working today, I think you would put George Looney on that list, even if he's not among the most famous. He's a little bit reclusive. He's not that, he's not very self-promoting. His work is exquisite, serious, important. 50 years from now, we'll read it. There's another author who is astoundingly creative in an entirely different way in Riverside, Fullerton, California. Her name is Irena Prytis. And I love her work, obviously. But I was thrilled when Alberto Rios wrote about her last book that she did with me, exactly what I had told her when I first saw the manuscript, that she's covering new territory. She's finding new ways to use American English language to talk about things that are important to her and to us. And I'm happy to say she's doing another book. It takes her 4 or 5 years to do a book. She's a very serious person. She's also a single mother of a youngster and a triathlon champion. All kinds of interesting people out there.
Very, very exciting. We'll look forward to more of what Red Mountain Press writes, but I'm especially interested in the excitement of what you bring forth in this world of publishing. So, it's been a joy to speak with you today, Susan, and thanks to everyone who has joined us. I'm Marvel Harrison, and from all of us at Mimbres Press, may your day be sparked with curiosity and wonder. See you again on the next Writer's Life.